Hello, my favorite listener. This is Engine of War, Episode 7. This is a Rust Belt Studio production. We have the two other shows, Mikey and the Garden Arch, the spiritual cousin to this show, and it runs on the opposite Tuesday, and Into the Dark of the Woods. Kind of a spooky, dramatic, Upper Peninsula, Michigan-based show that runs on Fridays at 1 o'clock. Now, settle in. This show is about to start. Dawn came up thin and pewter-colored, a sky the color of old coins. The copper pennant over the cook fire hung wet and heavy, rain clinging to its threads like obligation. Someone had nailed 2 more stakes into the mud in the night so the banner wouldn't list. It listed anyway. Banners always did in the wilds. Kael woke on the wagon bench with the particular ache of a man who's measured himself carefully the day before and found the number honest. The field docent slept sitting, head bent like a question mark. Bren snored once and startled himself into silence. Evo's hands twitched the way a sparker sometimes do when Spark is dreaming in his bones. Kael sat up, flexed the stiffness out of his fingers, and listened to the camp wake. The sounds were ordinary. Pans, water, someone cussing at a rope, until a horn blew down in the pit. The horn wasn't a call to arms, but it was the flat mine horn, a 2-note alarm that meant air wrong or earth wrong or everything wrong. The camp's scatter of motion snapped itself into a single line pointed at the shaft. "Oh," the docent said sleepily. "Guild! With me!" The guards had their shock lances off the pegs before they were fully awake, instinct selecting tools before names did. The copper captain climbed the wagon tailboard without touching the ladder and made a show of looking brave. Sera came at a run from the waterline, sleeves already rolled, scar wet and dark, hair bound close to her skull. She didn't run to anyone, she ran to the problem. At the shaft mouth, the air had changed, colder, wet in a way that had nothing to do with rain. A haze hung, and underneath it, the breath of the pit came off its own schedule as if a mine had found lungs and didn't like them. A wilding in a miner's cap with a busted lamp staggered out, coughing. "Seam broke. Water in the second vein. There are runners trapped." "How many?" 5. The miner looked down at Sera instead of the captain when he answered. "Maybe 6. There's a bot down there holding a brace, the small one, the cart hauler. If it goes, gallery goes with it." "Pumps," the docent said, already looking to Kael. "Can you smooth them?" "Yes, docent." "Guards. 2 with me, 2 on the windlass, 2 on the watch. Keep brass reach out of my yard. If they smell trouble, they'll show." The captain leaned over the shaft and shouted into it as if the words could cog themselves into ladders. Sera had a rope around her waist before anyone told her to, and she looped it twice, flat knots a sailor would have approved of, and tested the give with a jerk that made the men on the other end grunt. "Who's down?" "Pavel, Hosk, Little Rin, Sumi. I think I heard Daniel and the bot, Cart H2. She grabbed a second rope and looped it under her arms, then palmed a hooked iron pit and hammered hybrid off a rack and tucked it into her belt. The captain looked at her and he opened his mouth to talk and then thought better of it. Sera didn't even bother with him. She met Kael's eyes once across the ring of men and the smear of wet in the shape of the day. "Pump," she said. Kael nodded. It was a sparker's nod, functional, acknowledging the ledger between them without trying to improve it. He turned to the winch engine that fed the galley pumps. It was a contraption of iron and intent, flywheel, belt, a gap-toothed gear chewing at a leather drive, a piston that should have been content to climb and sink but was stuttering like a drunk trying stairs. The mechanic on duty had one hand on a spanner and the other on a prayer that had worn a groove in his pocket. "Don't bless it." Kael said it without malice and laid his left palm on the housing. The metal had a skin cold to it, the kind you get from fear rather than weather. He closed his eyes and listened to the engine's own want. It wasn't a heart, not like autonomy had. He felt it as a warmth just out of reach, like standing near a bread oven when someone else opens it. "Give me that," he said, and the mechanic handed him a square of oiled cloth without being told what that was. Kael wiped grime from the line of bolts he needed to feel and found the rhythm under the skid of the noise. He touched the coil strapped to the housing. Not a healer's coil, but a workman's, a piece meant to take vibration and not thought, and drew a line thin as wire. Ozone. Ash. Rain. He wasn't going to wake this machine, he wasn't going to teach it life, just to remind the piston what down was when it had forgotten, to polish the moment the prowl should catch and the instant the valve should let go. The flywheel answered with a steadier whir. The belt stopped slapping, and the piston found something like pride and kept to it. "Go," Kael said, and the mechanic shoved the lever. Water kicked in the lines, coughed, settled into a rush you could feel in your knees. The sound in the shaft changed, wet air moved. Somewhere below, a man shouted something that might have been a word. "Ropes," Sera called. The men on the windlasses took wraps around their hips and leaned back. She went over the edge with her boots finding toe holds cut in by the hands in softer days, the rope hissing on the wet rim. The scar on her arm flashed and vanished. The dark swallowed her without asking her name. Kael put his palm back to the iron. He could have turned away and gone to triage, the safe place in a day like this, but he held the engine like a throat and listened for stutter. Each time the rhythm made as if to tip, he smoothed it. He didn't pour much, he wasn't that kind of a fool, but each thread of himself he laid along the machine's old memory added up to a presence his chest recognized and tried to charge him for. Ozone. Ash. Rain. Every time he drew, he braked the line before it bit. The ache under his sternum hummed low, a bell rung with 2 fingers instead of a mallet. He breathed with it and kept the piston honest. "Water's coming. She says brace on the wet side. Hosk's legs. It's not good." The copper captain hovered, hands useless, words hunting for a place to land. The field docent set himself where the rescued would arrive and took out bandages and linen and the expression docents wear that means, "I will not love you, and I will keep you alive." Brendan Evo stood ready with coils and rags in the steadying stillness that is a sparker's gift when he is not spending. The rope shivered. It telegraphed the underground into the hands of the men on the windlass, jolts that meant a person on the end of the line. The men read those shivers with the attention of bookmen at sermons. The rope taught them how not to lie. The first head came up, Sumi. Soot-streaked, braid plastered to her back, eyes narrowed against grit. She bore her own weight, hands on the rope, boots finding the wall. She swung past the lip and spat and started to say Hosk and then decided thanks would be better, then said neither. The docent caught her arm and checked what was under the dirt. "Next." The rope pictured itself moving and did. Hosk came next. A big man limp in the way big men are when the thing that keeps them upright has been borrowed. His leg bent where legs don't, and Sera's knot had him tied across the chest. A second rope cradled the bad limb. Kael left the engine long enough to meet the body, hand to cradle, line drawn thin as breath. Ozone. Ash. Rain. Not to fix yet, but to keep the sounds inside Hosk's chest arranged in an order that wouldn't punish him for what he couldn't help. "Hold. Set him there." Kael pointed without looking. His arm knew the table better than his eye. He went back to the engine before it felt abandoned. He called down into the shaft, not loud, just enough to give the word a chance to answer. "Brace?" Bot's holding. Cart H2's got the beam. We move when your pump does its job. The machine below, cart H2, was small as machines go, but meant for pulling ore carts along narrow rails. In Kael's head, he could picture its squat shoulders, piston-braced legs, the stubby plates on its hands that had been forged for hooks and gotten used for fingers. It would be standing under a diagonal brace that had decided to think about failing, lens turned up because machines did not look down when they were doing the thing men had told them they were for. It would be braced like a man with a boulder on his back. Quiet and steady and not important to anyone until it stopped being there, and then very important. The pump sang. The pump sang. It wasn't a pretty song. It had a cough in it and an old man's rattle, but it had rhythm. Water moved. Air moved after it. The damp on Kael's forearms grew cold with it. Now! Send the bar! On my mark! You, Harold, stop shaking. The bar won't hold itself because you ask. The men on the windlass smiled in spite of themselves at the tone. It wasn't command, not the guild kind. It was the voice of a person making a small, specific thing happen because it had to. They fed down a pry bar with marks on it where hands had loved it. The rope said when to stop, and they stopped. The rope said when to give, and they gave. The third body came up, Rin, small enough that the docent's hands looked like they could hold all of him. He had a bruise like a second uglier mouth under one eye. He tried to apologize before he knew for what. Bren looked relieved to have something to lay flat. He put a thumb on the bruise and a thought under the thumb, and the swelling changed its mind. Ozone. Ash. Rain. Down in the well, they could hear Sera calling out orders. Every word landed on top of emotion and was smaller for having done its job. The men at the windlass began to believe the rope was a friend. The water eased a fraction and the pump song lost a little of its panic. Kael took a long blink for a heartbeat and felt the engine's heat in the palm like something answering him from the other side of a door. Still not a heart, not that, but an ember agreeing that down and up were real things it could rely on. He almost put more of himself in to say good the way a man pats a horse when it steps right, but he didn't. He had sense enough left over to keep his pride in words. Daniel, you're last, don't argue. If you argue, I'll let the beam choose you. The people topside heard a laugh that could have been a sob. Yeah, Seraphim. Sera turned to the cart. Hold as best you can. Below, the bot did what it had been built for. It had taken a beam and made it its own shape into a prop against collapse, pistons set, joint springs singing with the strain. Its lens would be fogged with wet. Its menlight would be sending warmth where the logic of its frame said to send it. It would not think of dying. It would think of holding, and then whatever men asked next. A fourth body came up. A woman swearing at the rope like it was a mule that had forgotten who fed it. She kissed the air with her boots and hit dirt, then spat, then kissed again as if to apologize to the ground for the spit. The docent caught her hand and made them still long enough to count 10 pulses. Next. Now! Sera called up, and the rope told the surface there were 2 weights on it for a breath and then 1. The pump hammered, the engine rattled once like a cough. Kael laid his hand deeper and then ran the thin wire of himself between the 2 bolts that decided they were tired of being married. Ozone. Ash. Rain. Up! Daniel came into the daylight gray and grinning and shaking. She's right behind. Sera surfaced a moment later, boots finding the last toe cuts, rope singing where it had rasped stone. She had dirt in her teeth and didn't have time to spit it. She held the other rope in one hand, and on the end of that rope something heavy came with her, scraping the shaft wall with a sound that made men's shoulders creep out of their own accord. Cart H2's head housing broke daylight, lens fog, green rim dim. The bot rode the rope in the great cut. The bot had ridden up the rope in the graceless way machines have when they have done their job and are willing to become cargo. Its hands were cut. The bot rode the rope in the graceless way that autonomy have when they have done their job and are willing to become cargo. Its hands were still set in the brace grip that had kept the galley from falling on 6 miners' heads. One of its leg pistons vented steam and a sad little hissed. Don't shock it. It held your men up. The guard, to their credit, lowered their rods. The captain, to his detriment, found a speech and started it. Copper, thanks. Bar. Under the plate. No, under. You bend the mount. We've got nothing to blame when it limps otherwise. Kael left the engine then, not because it didn't need him, but because the part of him that heals cannot refuse a thing that has finished doing the hardest part of being brave. He put his hands on the bot's knee brace, not to pour, not to animate, only to ask the spring to unclench and the valve to stop being a coward. Ozone. Ash. Rain. For the first time, the heat in the metal answered with more than utility, a thinner warmth. A pulse, not like the piston's work, touched the heel of his palm. A menlight, trying to be generous to joints that had spent themselves. It brushed him the way a tired child leans against your leg because you happen to be there and soft. Kael did not pull, he did not push. He let the joint remember the difference between holding and standing down. The lens cleared a sliver. It turned and put Kael into its slice of the world. No words this time. Machines did not waste speech on days like this, but the look had the same clean acceptance he had seen in the timber camp and in another mind, the kind that says, I see you. Sera's eyes flicked from the bot to Kael to the copper pennant dripping on its stake. The tension in her body eased, only a notch, only visible if you knew her scar like a map. Kael didn't ruin it with words. The pump coughed one last time and settled into a hum you could overlay a heartbeat on. The engine shiver went away and Kael felt the ache of the chest announce the bill and decided not to add a tip. The captain raised his chin like a man posing for a book plate. Copper stands guard. Men stand each other up. Sera replied, too quiet for him and loud enough for everyone else. The wildlings nodded not to her, but to the scar that had said no even when yes would have been easier. Brennan Evo wiped tools and hands, packed coils, moved with the careful economy of men who had not wasted themselves. The field docent folded his bloody linen into smaller stories and then set them in a bucket. The windlass crew let the rope lie in a neat gray snake that looked, for once, satisfied. Kael stood with his palm still on the bot's knee and let the warmth go from his hand to the metal and back until both agreed to stop. He took his hand away and the lens did not follow him. It did not need to. Sera rolled her shoulder, retied her rope, and looked at the sky as if it had just offered a fourth answer she hadn't used yet. Kael met her eyes over the bobbing heads in the collected line of the copper pennant making promises. He gave her the smallest nod a man can give and have it count. She answered with one you couldn't miss if you wanted to. The docent turned to Evo. Head back to Copper Spire and report on return.
Yes, docent.
The rain had gone from steady to thin mist, the kind that clings instead of falls. Fires guttered low. That was when the horn blew from the north ridge, not the mine horn this time, but Copper's practice call, the one low and ragged, the sound of a man too tired to lie. The watchman stumbled into camp a moment later, cloak plastered to his back, eyes wide with what he'd seen. He didn't waste breath on greetings.
Banners. Brass reach, not raiders this time, it's a column.
How many?
Looks like at least a dozen carts, soldiers 3 lines deep. Horns carried in the fog, they're setting camp on the far ridge looking down at us.
The captain puffed his chest, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him.
They wouldn't dare strike here, not with copper posted.
He looked around, waiting for agreement, and got none.
Kael stood at the edge of the healer's tents, kit slung, face unreadable. He thought of the mine, of Sera's rope, of the bot's dim lens. A column meant more broken men, more ledgers of pain. He wasn't sure whether the ache in his chest came from yesterday's draw, today's activity, or tomorrow's promise. Sera had risen without a word. She stood near the fire, scar catching the embers. The rain didn't touch her eyes, and she looked to the north, not at the captain, not at Kael, but at the ridge itself, as if she could see the banners waiting there. They'll strike. Not tonight, tomorrow, or the day after, when they've eaten. When the ground's ready, Brass Reach doesn't march to wave flags, they march to take. The camp hushed, even the captain, and in the silence the horn on the ridge blew again, low, patient, promising.
Hello again. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Engine of War. It's a Rust Belt Studio production, and it was written and performed by Bryan Foster. You can find this and all of our other shows wherever you get your favorite podcast. You can support the show and the feeds. Listens go a long way. Sharing with someone who might be interested goes huge. Any comments that you'd like to leave on your favorite podcast player, those are great too. If you'd like to help us financially, you can join the Patreon. The link is in the show notes below. For just $2 a month, you will get every episode of our shows ad-free and a day early. You can upgrade to $5 and go into the projectionist booth. You'll get that previous benefit, plus anything we make exclusively for Patreon. At $9, become an executive producer, join the studio, and help shape the future. Anything you decide always goes a long way. We appreciate you being here, and until next time, my favorite listener.